Hey guys, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thanks for watching another video on ancient Greek and Roman history. Today we're going to be doing Aristides and Cato the Elder from ancient Greece, ancient Athens, and ancient Rome, respectively. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, Plutarch kind of goes through this pretty big opening where he refutes all the arguments that Aristides might have come from wealth. One of the arguments was that the fact that he became an archon in itself must have proved that he was financially strong, but he refutes his point, saying it's also possible that he just did it out of his own merit. And similarly, they also argue that ostracism was only for the wealthy. But once again, it's also possible that he was just so powerful and so loved by the people that he could have been ostracized. So Plutarch was pretty adamant that Aristides wasn't rich, and for all intents and purposes, I think that's a better way of thinking of him, for it's better in his comparison with Cato the Elder, and it's just a more motivating way, to think about him. So yeah, he was born in 430 BC, and he makes himself pretty well known by performing well in the Battle of Marathon, which supposedly he must have done so well that he granted himself archonship. There's kind of a gap in terms of where he made that ultimate leap, but I guess he performed very well in the Battle of Marathon and ultimately proves himself to become archon. His main inspiration was the Lycurgus, so we also have a video on him previously, who is the ancient lawgiver of Sparta, who essentially invented communism and turned Sparta into a great war-loving state where they didn't have, well, they had their own closed currency, but only iron ingots, so they couldn't use gold or silver, which really suppressed their ability for international trade, but also suppressed their ambition for luxuries. So Lycurgus was his main inspiration. So kind of on the political spectrum in terms of the archons at the time in Athens, Themistocles was the populist, and we also have a video on him as well. He was loved by the people and very anti-oligarchy, very anti-aristocracy. On the other end of the spectrum, there was Cimon, who was very, very pro-oligarchy and very elitist. And then Aristides kind of sat in the middle. He's considered the just, who was kind of a good mediator between the two. However, both ultimately ended up hating him. More specifically, Themistocles was sort of his rival from a very young age. Supposedly, the two competed over the love of a young boy, which was a common thing to do at the time. They often had lovers who were young people. But they competed over the love of this guy. His name was Stasilaus, and they competed over him and supposedly created an enemy or created a rivalry that lasted until both of their deaths. So ultimately, Themistocles, because he was so popular amongst the people, such a populist government, he manages to get his rival Aristides ostracized. So as we discussed earlier, ostracism isn't merely the conventional usage of the word, but it's a government tool where everyone would vote on a piece of plastic, or a piece of, I don't know, like a piece of bowl, I think I used earlier, but they'll essentially write a name on a ballot, and if there are at least 6,000 votes, then the vote will be valid, and then whoever has the most votes will be kicked out of the country for 10 years, which is pretty crazy. Obviously, that's why you can't have too much democracy. Even today's main Western powers like U.S., U.K. are more resemble republics than pure democracies. But either way, he gets ostracized, and just to prove how just he is in the process, he a blind man comes up to Aristides and tells Aristides to write his own name on the ballot, and Aristides asks the blind man, why has he wronged you? And the blind man says no, but he's just tired of everyone calling him the just. And Aristides, just to prove how just he really is, he writes his own name on the ballot without further questions and puts it in. And ultimately, he is ostracized. Prior to that, he proved that he was extremely just. He made very few friends, and that's probably one of the reasons he was ostracized. He once said that friends ultimately lead one to commit atrocities or commit unjust actions, because eventually they'll ask them favors, and ultimately that probably led to his ostracism. He always ensured that everyone got a fair trial. On one occasion, the court really wanted this guy to just get convicted immediately, and one of his friends told Aristides, just convict him, he has wronged you personally. But Aristides replies, and the quote is written here, tell me what wrong he has done for you, for it is your cause, not my own, which I sit judge of. So that's just a testament to his ability to bring his own personal desires and needs out of the case and make an objective decision. So yeah, also another great historian besides Plutarch, I'd say Herodotus is the next best historian. He says the best and most honorable man in Athens by Herodotus. So that's a really great way to be remembered by such a great guy. But anyways, he gets ostracized, but fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately for him, 3 years into the ostracism, 3 years out of the 10, he is called back because they are having a war with the Persians, Xerxes, and they need to bring back all the exiles in order to win. So Aristides was always more conservative. He wanted to maintain Athens as a land-based power. However, Themistocles was more forward-thinking in the sense that he wanted it to be a navy-based power. He argued against Themistocles. Maybe he actually wanted them to be actually thought it was more rational to be a world power, or maybe he was just arguing Themistocles in spite of him. But ultimately, Themistocles wins, but Aristides puts his ego aside and helps him. And that, I think, proves ultimately that he might have been the better man of the two, Aristides and Themistocles, in the sense that Aristides was willing to collaborate in defeat. But ultimately they win. They defeat Xerxes in the war, and Themistocles has intention of Athens taking over all of Greece. So he confides Aristides. I don't know why he would confide in his own rival, but he tells him, perhaps because they had a new friendship at the time, but he tells him that he wants to destroy one of these ports, Confederate ports, another Greek port, to give Athens total naval domination. And Aristides tells the people that it is the smartest but most evil idea that he has ever heard. And then there's a court case, and Themistocles is up for ostracism. But during the case, Aristides tells the facts and doesn't speak overly illy of him, and sort of lets the case happen as it should happen. Whereas when he was up for ostracism, Themistocles would berate him and attack him from all sides. So once again, this kind of proves that he is more just than, well, he is considered, his title is the Just, than Themistocles. But yeah, ultimately Themistocles got ostracized. There are conflicting opinions on how Aristides might have died. Some say he died on a sea voyage, some say he just died of old age. Another more out there belief is that after Themistocles got removed, they wanted to get rid of all powerful people, and once again he got ostracized. It's hard to say, but essentially at that point he's kind of went off into obscurity, and that was sort of the end of him. So yeah, that's it for Aristides. I guess we'll get back to him in the comparison. Moving to Cato the Elder. So Cato the Elder is, I think, a very, very interesting guy. I've been looking forward to speaking of him. So he came from a very poor background. Later he reflects that he comes from a long line of military heroes, but none of them were a general or anything substantial. He was very ugly. It is said that he had a very rugged face. You just look at this carving, look at his noses. I don't want to be mean or anything, but he's not a very pretty looking guy. And he had these sharp gray eyes that seemed really aggressive and really scared people off. But yeah, he worked very hard. He became a lawyer, and he would work not for free, but for very low wages, and he would protect anyone who needed protecting. It is said that he was not only not greedy in the fees that he gave out, but also he was also very risky on the battlefield. He was not worried about getting scars, and supposedly he had like scars all over his chest at a very young age. So, and he was very laborious. He would always work. He would often work for free, always working very hard, and he lived and ate very frugally. He would, during military excursions, pretty much just drink water, maybe a little bit of vinegar, and he would, even at the height of his political power, he would still drink the wine that the peasants drank. So he was very, very frugal guy. So at the age of 17, he gets the opportunity to fight against Hannibal with his mentor, his main inspiration, Fabius, who we also talked about. So Fabius was of the opposers of Hannibal, considered the shield of Rome, for he was very essentially he started guerrilla warfare, and he would win small battles because he knew he could not beat Hannibal head on, and Cato very much admired this. It is said that they spoke the same language and that they both believed in frugality and hardship and the glory that comes with hardship. So he was very much impressed by Cato. So going back after the end of the war, or the temporary end of the war, Hannibal was still out there, but he goes back to his place, and one of his neighbors, let's see if I can find his name here. Either way, his neighbor was a pretty powerful guy, and he very much admired. His name was Valerius, and he very much admired and saw all the work and the great estate or that Cato was building up for himself. He invited him to dinner, and he was very much amazed by what Cato was doing. This guy, he was known for investing in a lot of people, outsiders, to bring into Rome to start political careers, and Cato was sort of the perfect candidate for that. So he goes through the typical progression from general to aedile to praetor to consul, and sort of just like Fabius, and sort of since he was an outsider, he very much opposed Scipio Africanus. So once again, it's really too bad that Scipio's life got lost. Plutarch supposedly wrote a life about him, but he was the guy who ultimately defeated Hannibal. But like Fabius, he very much criticized Scipio and his doings. While he was quaestor, who was pretty much treasurer, he very much criticized Scipio's spending and ridiculed him at all points. But Scipio responded that his duty is for outcome, not to the account book. So Scipio came from a wealthy family, and he didn't care for wealth. And in Scipio's defense, with Cato's attitude or Fabius's attitude, they never could have beaten Hannibal. They needed somebody who was really willing to go all out and accumulate a lot of debt to ultimately defeat Hannibal, and so he did. So no shame on Scipio here, but Cato was right in terms of his frugality. Plutarch does criticize him though, because in terms of slaves, Cato would obviously, he had slaves, but he kept very few, and he only kept working slaves. So at the time, often people had slaves who were just like pretty, just to have like pretty people like walking around their estate. But he kept only hardworking ones. But Plutarch criticizes him that as they got old, he would sell them off very cheap because he had no need for cheap labor. Same thing, even an old dog or an old animal, he would sell off. So, and Plutarch criticizes this, that he says there is more commerce between man and man than merely profit. So, and I think that's very important. And he kind of quotes a lot of Athenians too, who would even treasure their Olympic winning horses. They would bury them, whereas Cato, once they no longer proved any purpose to him, he would sell them off. So he was pretty ruthless in this regard, but he was very much appreciated in Rome and very much admired because he was sort of contrarian to the growing flamboyancy of the Republic at the time. So eventually, with Flaccus, Valerius Flaccus, who was the guy who brought him up, he becomes consul, and they fight a battle in Spain. He decides that he wants to hire some barbarians, and the barbarians charge him a lot, and the Romans criticize it, saying, "Oh, don't hire the barbarians." But as frugal as Cato was, he decided that they needed the barbarians, and they ultimately won. So kind of shows that he is willing to cross the other side, and he was willing to spend. Maybe not as much as Scipio, but maybe enough to win some victories on his own. He continues to prove his military abilities in Greece, ultimately pushing the Carthaginians out of out of Greece, ultimately leaving a route for Scipio to later destroy them. And then, sort of at the end, after becoming consul, he becomes censor, which is essentially they're in charge. It's not a military role. It's probably considered higher than consul. Consul was the military leader. Censor were in charge of, pretty much internal legislation. So some of the things he did were better or worse. At one point, he restricted the amount of jewelry and amount of gold that women could wear. It was very much criticized, and ultimately lost him a lot of fame when it was overturned. Similarly, he advocated for a law called Lex Orachia, which limited the number of people that were allowed to attend entertainment things. So he was almost doing some of these things in spite of people. He also had Lex Valachia, which also restricted the amount of wealth or amount of jewelry that women could possess in their hands, have in their own hands. So, because he thought women did not need as much money. So he was very, very harsh in this regard. Nearing the later part of his life, he sort of starts up the war again with Carthage. He starts going on a rampage, saying Carthage must be destroyed, Carthage must be destroyed, and eventually starts causing another war with Carthage, but he dies before it starts. Fortunately, Scipio ends up finishing it all to kind of prove him wrong. But yeah, that's essentially it. Let's see what quotes we have here. Here are some. He was considered also a fantastic orator. He's got a lot of wit and a lot of logic. A lot of the quotes I thought of writing down don't make much sense without context, but at one point they were having a discussion on how much food should be distributed amongst Rome, and he responded to the people, "It is difficult, O citizens, to make speeches to the belly, which has no ears." So just kind of a testament to his wit. And then he also considered people to be like sheep, in the sense that they could not, individually they would oppose somebody, but in groups they would mass up and become much stronger. So he has this quote: "So you, when you've got together in a body, let yourselves be guided by those whom singly you would never think of being advised." So just again, his wit and sort of a testament to his logic. Yeah, but I think what's most amazing about him was that he came from nothing and he stayed frugal throughout, and even managed to build a great estate for himself. So yeah, moving to the comparison. I guess firstly they're similar in that they came from nothing, but they're different in the sense that Cato managed to become something. He worked on his agriculture very extensively and managed to build quite a big estate. He sort of had a very lean operation running. He could have probably written an operation textbook himself. In fact, he was the first individual to write history in Latin. He has this book, De Agricultura, which is one of the first books ever written on agriculture, and he's got on soldiery, many other books in terms of guidance, and a very much an educational figure as well. But yeah, he ran a lean operation and managed to accumulate wealth for himself, whereas Aristides maintained poor throughout his whole life, so poor that supposedly some people didn't even want to marry his daughters because they were so poor. Fortunately for Aristides, in his funeral, Alcibiades supposedly financed that, and Alcibiades was definitely not a frugal guy, though. He spent much, and yeah, pretty much completely the opposite. It's interesting that he managed to, or he decided to finance it. I guess in terms of difference, Plutarch notes that although Aristides was poor at the time, the gap between the rich and poor wasn't that big, whereas the gap between the rich and poor, the gap that Cato had to climb, Plutarch reflects is like an ocean. So the fact that he came from a small Sabine village all the way to the censor of Rome was really quite amazing. So he called it crossing an ocean. In terms of military endeavors, Aristides was, as Plutarch notes, one of 10 commanders in the battles he fought, and he can never really be considered the sole winner of any of the fights. Whereas in Rome, there was always at any point 2 consuls, and so he had more credit for the fights that he won. But on the flip side, Plutarch also notes that Cato's battles maintained Rome as great. Rome was great when he started the battles, Rome was great when it ended the battles. Whereas the battles that Aristides involved himself in were very important and revolutionary for the state. Yeah. I guess lastly, Cato never gave in to Scipio. He criticized Scipio to the very end, till his grave, exactly to his grave, actually. Whereas Aristides managed to put his ego aside and collaborate with his rival from youth, Themistocles. And I think for that reason he's called the just, and perhaps better in that regard. But yeah, these guys are both fantastic individuals and very different from the others that we've discussed. I was thinking the other day, there are great leaders in this book, or great leaders throughout history who have come from all different backgrounds. They could be rich, they could be poor, they could be frugal, they could be like Cato, or they could be extravagant in spending like Scipio. But I think what all these heroes have in common, or any great individuals ever have in common, is that they study history. Even in business, I think all the great individuals had studied history. No one's going to become Warren Buffett from learning from their uncle, unless your uncle is Warren Buffett. But you could learn to be a great investor by studying Warren Buffett and studying history. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you watch the next one. Thanks so much.